can hear my stomach. Monica got like California tortilla.
Sorry guys, technical difficulties. Hello and welcome to today's webinar, Making Government Wallets Transparent. My name is Tyler Masterson and I'll be your host. Today we will be talking with Senior Project Manager at Montgomery County Government, Victoria Lewis, and Manager of Process and Technology at OMB, Scott Coble. They'll be taking us through a number of things. The history of their open data program, their open data plan detailing the hundreds of data sets they'll be releasing this summer, some decisions they've made on why they want to release a more dynamic view of their budget, a design partnership approach to innovation, and last and not least, a demonstration of the budget. Please remember you can send us your questions during the webinar via our webinars@socrata.com email address or by commenting in the webinar page. With that, let's get started. So Victoria and Scott, let's talk about budgets. Why does Montgomery County want to make it easier for citizens to understand budgets and how they're structured and allocated?
Thanks, Tyler. This is Scott Coble with Montgomery County. We've had our data out on what we call Open Montgomery for the last 3 years. So we've had our budget data out there. And it is really what you're looking at is a giant Excel spreadsheet. It has 18,000 records with probably 20 columns in it. And through time, I don't think we've had as many views as some of our other data sets out on Open Montgomery, and we wanted to give the residents a very good view of what we're doing fiscally in Montgomery County. So working with Socrata, we've developed this budget module we're going to show you later that gives citizens an easy way to view the budget, understand how the money's flowing down through the system, and really take away a very good understanding of how Montgomery County's budget works.
Great, well thanks for that. And why did you decide to partner with Socrata on the design of this app? Because it sounds like you had budget PDF documents on the web, but you wanted to kind of explore a more dynamic experience.
I think I can answer that. Montgomery County already has a history of showing financial transparency with our publishing of the recommended and approved budgets and some spending data. However, although we technically complied with our open data law of publishing this data, we felt we could do better. We looked at best practices and existing tools that would educate the resident on how we do things, improve access to our data, and encourage data analysis and collaboration with the public. After not finding a complete match, we decided to partner with Socrata to build the tool we had in mind that leveraged our hard work in getting the data on our open data platform. We had complementary roles where Socrata provided product development resources and a core knowledge of our open data platform, and we in Montgomery County contributed operational knowledge and provided strategic vision and guidance.
Thanks. So basically you identified a need for what you guys wanted to accomplish with the budget. It didn't exist in the product space, and you basically teamed up with Socrata to make it happen. So I appreciate that, Victoria. So that's kind of interesting. Can you walk us through the process of designing open budget since it didn't exist at the time?
Sure. I'm going to take us over to a PowerPoint slide that we have that can help explain that. So this process was more organic in nature since we were creating something, but this module and all of our transparency modules follow the same general flow. For scoping, we first determined our module parameters. Beyond looking at best practices, we had a focus group of residents and advocates tell us what mattered to them regarding financial transparency. We learned from them that we needed to lose the budget lingo and be able to answer basic questions like the funding and status of a library construction project in their neighborhood. After that session, we defined some user personas of who could benefit from this module. We referred to them frequently throughout the project. We then went through an iterative design process with Socrata. Once we felt it was at a good point, we brought people in that represented our user persona groups and asked for feedback on how to further improve the tool. Once the screens were finalized, we defined what data sets we needed to support the module. The next phase for testing, the one we are in the final stages of, is our data verification step. Here, we are verifying that the data sets, calculations, and visualizations are all accurate. After this stage is done, we will launch.
Awesome. So it sounds like you're applying a very regimented approach of a system development lifecycle. So that's good to hear. Can we actually go into the Open Budget platform right now and take a look what's inside?
Sure.
So I think we're going to be switching it over from the PowerPoint presentation to sharing your desktop. Is that correct, Victoria?
Yes.
Yes.
And you can see our budget module screen, Tyler?
Yes, I can. Thanks.
Okay, so I'm going to explain the budget module to you now, and this is actually a live demo. So what we have here is the budget module, and in Montgomery County, like a lot of jurisdictions, we have two types of our budget. We have the operating budget, which really go down into personnel costs and operating expenses. And then we also have the capital budget, which goes into projects. For the purposes of this demo, I'm just going to fully focus on the capital budget because you can see maps and you can actually see project statuses.
Okay. So
if you can view my mouse up here, you'll notice that I'm on the capital projects map, and this is Montgomery County that I'm circling around. What is pretty neat with this map view, all these data points or these plots actually show projects within the county. And as I scroll through, you'll notice that there's a variance in size of the circles. The variance in size directly relates to the amount of budgeted money that was for each project. So you'll see here, as I scroll over, there's $141 million dedicated to Equipment Maintenance Operations Center. Right next to it, there's $2.74 million for one of our bike paths. The user, from a high-level perspective, can actually drill down and go through the county and see where all the projects are spent across the county, and actually click on one of these circles to drill down and get more specific details. So I'm going to go ahead and just use Equipment Maintenance Operations as an example. So you can see now I'm starting now to get down. I'm at the lowest level of data that you can get, and I mentioned before on our data sets there's 18,000 records. You're actually looking at here on the left the name of the project, the amount that's spent towards the project, and if you can see this, it might be small on your screens, but the percentage of the money spent versus the entire budget of the capital budget. So in this case, there's $141 million dedicated to the Equipment Maintenance and Operations Center, and that makes up 1% of the capital budget. Now this user interface is I think very intuitive once you get the hang of it. It's easy to use, and it's also very informative, and we've broken it down to use, as Victoria alluded to, language that makes sense to your general user. Whereas we have a lot of, obviously, budget specialists in OMB that use different terminology. A general resident might not even know what the difference between revenues and funding is. So up here we have what's the plan, which is showing you the map and where it goes, where it's from, and I'm going to click on this link. It's going to show you the funding sources. So instead of saying funding, we say where it's from. I know it's at a high level, but I think this makes a lot more sense to the resident. And then Tyler, if you look down here, you'll see out of our funding sources, they're all broken down in this nice diagram. Again, the circles equate to the amount of funding for them. And you can see the interim finance makes up almost $98 million for this project out of 141. Then we have our bonds that make up 41 million, and then as these circles get smaller, you can see they're just much smaller amounts. The next bubble, if you can see where I'm hovering now, shows whether it's a local funding source or an external funding source. And some of these projects will have another bubble up here that would be external, and they all nicely filter up into the total, which you see here in this yellow bubble. Beneath this right here, you'll see a timeline that shows, in the capital budget we have in Montgomery County, it goes over 6 years. You'll see the timeline of the funding sources and how they're allocated across that timeline. And again, once you highlight, you'll notice they're called flyouts that will appear over the line that you're on. So I'm on, let's just do one that's obvious, interim finance. You can see at the top there's $84 million in 2014, and how the funding then goes down to the point where it's $0 in 2016. On the left here, we also have our description of the project that gives you more detailed from, I guess, a content perspective. So you'll notice if I hover over this, we actually link back. I'm not going to click on it for this purpose, but there's a link to the project website that actually takes us, I think this one is from, forgive me, I think it's, Department of Transportation, would take you to their website where they actually have project descriptions in much more detail. So we've linked in all of our county website with this budget module, which is really slick. Now I'm going to go back to what's the plan here. And the other piece of this is, you see, this is the reuse of data across departments, which is, I mean, it's genius. But we have phases that are associated with each project. Now at OMB, we have the standards for the projects, mostly for our Department of General Services and Department of Transportation. But you'll see we have the planning phase, the preliminary design phase, all the way to completed. And this is a data set that's not coming from our budget data, but is actually linked in with Department of Transportation in this case, so the user can come in and see exactly where the project is. And right, it looks like this one's completed. You can see how it's highlighted here. And there's a little note here, you'll notice all project activities have been completed and paid for. This is, again, if you just drill down straight from the map, pretty much everything you have in this user interface has these flyouts. You can see as I'm rolling over here, this shows you the entire capital budget figures in the little flyout. You'll see now at this level, I'm just showing you the transportation budget, which is $2.6 billion versus the $141 million for this project. Now I'm going to show you one other way to drill down and to get through this. So if you can see my screen, now I'm here back at the top. Is that caught up yet with you, Tyler, and everyone? You can see here, and I'm not, for purposes of keeping this demo short and to take questions, the operating budget works very similar in the way that the user interface works, but I'm going to go down and drill down through the capital budget again to show you how we just got there. So each one of these bar graphs is actually the link, and it's a kind of a different way to look at things, but once you get the hang of it, it's very intuitive. So I'm going to click on transportation, and now you can see I've broken down transportation here in this the green area, to all the projects. And I believe we were just in mass transit. But Victoria brings up a good point. Right now we're in the chart view, which has the bar graphs that I'm hovering over. Each one of these sections also has a table view in case you just wanted to get the raw numbers. And there you can go and see how much money's been allocated for each, I guess at these point, projects within the transportation. There's also a link here where you can click to download the raw data that will bring it up. I think you got a CSV format, which you can open up in Excel or pretty much anything, even TextPad. But to go back to the demo, I'm going to go back the same route where we were in mass transit. So I'm going to go down another layer. Now you can see the 12 projects that are within mass transit. And do you remember? I can't find it. Well, I'll just pick a different one. Oh, here it is. If you remember, I went on the map and picked the Equipment Maintenance and Operations Center. Here's the other way to get to it, by drilling down just through the bar charts. So again, I'm at the same level now, but it shows you another way of where you get to everything and how you can show the details. And really, you get a lot of information that you can't get from what we alluded to earlier, those raw data sets. I mean, when you have 18,000 records, it's very difficult, unless you're a programmer or a budget nerd, there's no way you're going to figure this out. So this gives the our residents a great way to see what's going on within the county and the budget. So for purposes of the demo, that's what I wanted to show you. Let me see. There's what's it for, where is it from, you saw the funding, and then there's where is it going. So where is it from is our funding sources, and you can see me hover all these here. Where is it going is our expenditures. So we have two data sets, and then on this we're having a map. We actually wanted to show our council districts, and if you can see my screen here, we have 5 council districts, and it's showing where the funding for this mass transit project actually is, and you can see a lot of it is over here in District 3 and District 5. So Tyler, that's what I wanted to show everyone for this demo, so I can leave time for questions. Unless there was anything else you wanted to show, or if you wanted me to go down the operating side, I think that would wrap it up.
One thing that I wanted to point out was that we were development partners, so we spent some time helping to advise on things to include on the screens. But if one were implementing this module, what we have defined is a data schema that's comprised of data sets. So when we launch this, we are going to be making use of all of these data sets that we're publishing on our open data site. And as long as you have those data sets up and running, then you can populate this module. So that's how we're planning on using this going forward. Now that we've set up the structure, is populating our data to run this module.
Yes, and in fact, our next data sets will come out, I'd say like the first week in June, and that's going to be our approved data set. So across the board, we'll have FY15 approved operating budget and FY15 approved capital budgets. And we'll keep rolling this over year to year. At the timelines, we'll adjust as we go on. So that was our main goal, is to make sure that residents had an easy way to see everything, a storybook view, an intuitive interface, and they didn't have to go back into those raw data sets and try to filter out on their own. They can just come here and get the grasp of Montgomery County's financial status.
That's a really great point, Victoria and Scott, that you're leveraging the infrastructure that you've already set up, and then as you continue to, as the years go by, you're uploading data sets into that same data schema, and then this interface that the citizens are more familiar with, a more easily used interface, will be updated with the live data. So with all that talk about data, and Scott, you had mentioned 18,000 rows quite a number of times during the demonstration. What challenges did you face specifically with your data as you adopted this app, and kind of use that frame to talk about how you might recommend other municipalities and counties going forward? How will they be able to manage their data through this process?
Yeah, I mean, there was obviously a lot of lessons learned when we put this together. We had to determine what data to include. So that is about like what do we filter, what do we expose to the public. We went through a lot of vetting processes, and we started first, since we have 2 types of budget, we started first with our operating budget. And we were able to figure out basically what columns we're going to display on the open data site. So that's our raw data. And as we kind of got a grasp for what we were doing with the operating side, we went into, which is a little more difficult, I guess, the capital side, which we're releasing this year. So we're going to have both of those data sets out there. Setting up the structure of the data. We have a system called Hyperion that does all of our budgeting. It's our budgeting system, basically. And when we pulled some of this data out, one of the things we noticed is that, and this is getting semi-technical, there were same data types in the same column, which doesn't let you do any kind of visualizations or comparisons. So I'll equate it like this. Imagine we had one column that had dollars in it, it had numbers in it, it had percentages in it, and it had decimals in it. There was no way for us to compare dollars in that column across dollars anymore because they were mixed in with numbers. So we had to kind of separate the data out and structure it so it fit this budget module, and actually really so we could reuse it later in other applications, which we're going to talk about. So that was one of our biggest challenges, was the structure of the data and finding out what data to include. When we worked with Socrata and again with Victoria, we also wanted to figure out how to meaningfully display the data, and that's what I just drilled down on. We went through many iterations and many mock-ups to figure out how the easiest way for a resident to get to the bottom layer and figure out what's going on. And we had to do these storybooks, I guess, a number of times in a number of different mock-ups. Let's see. We also, Victoria did a lot of this, but benchmarking, we looked at similar sites and looked at kind of what other jurisdictions were doing. There isn't a whole lot out there, to be honest, for us to benchmark. So a lot of this was the first time through. But we did look and see if there's any lessons learned and how we could improve on what else was out in the rest of the country. So I guess that pretty much sums up the major challenges we've had developing this module.
I would say one thing that we felt that really worked out well for us was involving who we felt were the stakeholders or the main audience for this module. So having them come in from the beginning and then having them throughout the project help guide us on whether or not we're heading in the right direction with the module, and even from a data perspective, helping us understand how to translate things and the scope of what to include. That was very helpful.
Great, thanks. And Scott, you had alluded to additional applications, and I wanted to kind of dig into that a little bit. What are the next steps for Montgomery County with financial transparency?
So for the near term, we are working on finalizing our steps to launch this module. Also, we're working on finishing, moving from paper budget books to electronic publications of our budget books. In addition to that, we are completing development on our next module, which should be showing spending transparency.
Okay, so spending is the next step.
Yes, there's spending, and then I guess contracts is on the way. The budget book is the next big one for OMB, and that's going to come out in, I guess, the same time frame around July 1st. And what we learned is, since we've structured our data first for the budget module, we could reuse that data to actually publish our book every year, so it'll roll over very nicely. And we can use the data sets and create visualizations. That's probably a whole different webinar, but it's impressive to see. So.
And I think everyone will enjoy keeping tabs on you guys as you kind of progress through those different applications. So I appreciate your guys' time. We've got some questions from the viewers that I wanted to get to. The first question was, will this app replace the current CIP budget, and is that in PDF form?
So the app's not replacing, maybe I misunderstood the question. The app's not replacing the budget. And it's not replacing the publication. This is a separate, I guess, something separate that we're offering the residents. So we'll still have our budget books. This year we're going to do operating budget online, which is going to reuse and look very similar. It's going to have charts and graphs. And then we'll look to doing capital budget, where we can actually bring in GIS layers like I showed you on those maps, and replacing those paper publications with the actual online publications that include rich content. They're ADA compliant. It's a no-brainer at the end of the day. So.
Yeah, so the purpose of this module is to help provide a guided view of some complex financial data. So it's not going to be replacing a publication. It's going to be kind of helping our resident on another level than we do now.
Yeah, that makes sense. It's kind of a supplement to what is already existing going out to the public. So we got another question, which was, you talked about involving stakeholders in the process. Can you talk a little bit about who those stakeholders were and how you involved them?
Yes, so when we were determining what our high-level requirements were going to be for this budget module, I can honestly say that we were looking at it from an operating budget perspective. So we talked to OMB about the types of people that usually ask them questions through FOIA requests or participate in sessions with them where they ask questions about the budget. And we worked with Socrata to develop some what we call user personas, and that included residents, it included advocacy organizations, developers, media. We probably had about 4 or 5 different user personas that we focused on when we were designing this module, and then when we went through it to completion. So we invited people that were similar matches to that to a general scoping meeting where we heard from them, you know, when you think of budget, what do you think of? And we learned from that that a lot of the questions we were getting were about CIP projects, not necessarily operating. So although we found a lot of value in showing people our operating budget, we included that in our scope based on the feedback. And then once we had some sessions or some screens developed, then we brought people back in that were part of these user persona groups. And we did that through coordination through our Chief Innovation Officer, who deals a lot with external groups in the county. So he helped us find the types of people that we were looking for, and we would put them in a lab to observe how they react to different screens we have and how they felt about the flow of data and the terminology we were using.
Awesome. And with all those stakeholders, I imagine you've developed a product that essentially is more user-friendly and thus is going to draw more eyes. So with that, what's the best way for citizens to offer feedback about this app and the budget process in Montgomery County in general?
Well, currently through our Data Montgomery site, we have a 311 center that we receive a lot of comments from our site through. We also have suggestions at the bottom of our Data Montgomery site where people can suggest things that they would like to see. So I would imagine we'll have something similar to that on our module and on the budget book publication. So in some capacity, so that they have a way to give us the feedback. And I can see us over time kind of bringing people in from these user personas just to kind of get retrospect feedback, see what they would like to see in next phases of this and how we can make it even better each time.
Okay, great. And the follow-up question to that is have residents been actively seeking more information or complaining about a lack of information? Or is this simply a proactive effort on your guys' part to benefit residents?
I think it's a kind of a mix of both. So again, we've had our data sets out on Open Montgomery for 3 years, and they haven't honestly been getting a lot of hits. But Victoria and I have done a number of town hall meetings, and people have been asking questions about how can they read the budget without having to go through that raw data, those 18,000 records, and figure out where things are being, where the spending is. We also got a number of questions, ironically, about our schools, our public schools, and how that funding's worked out, which isn't included right now in the budget, but we can look at that potentially in the future.
And one thing to think about from our perspective is that our culture in Montgomery County embraces transparency. So it wasn't just a need to, that we're getting externally from people to provide a more guided view. The departments that have been participating in these transparency modules, OMB, Finance, and Procurement, all wanted this. They wanted to be able to show this guided view so that they could help explain this complicated data before these people download this raw data and they might misconstrue what they're saying. So there was an internal push for this also.
That's a great point. And I think data, once contextualized, becomes more accessible to citizens just in general. So I think that's a really good point. Transparency is adding additional context to raw data rather than just providing it. So I appreciate you guys walking us through that. One of the other questions was, why did you choose budget transparency before expense transparency? I
mean, I guess it was just, there was actually no real decision on that. It was just the way it kind of flowed out. So we were, not to say we were ahead of the game, but OMB actually, we had our data sets ready a little quicker, and we were able to work with Socrata on designing the module a little quicker. But to be honest, spending isn't far behind. You're only talking about maybe a month or two difference.
Yeah,
so,
a few months.
Or a few months.
One thing that was a consideration for this was that the people that we involved in the development of these modules were the best people from each department. The people had the most functional expertise about budgets, spending, and contracts. So we really align these modules also based on availability of these people, because each department, since they're functioning organizations, they had some busy cycles that we really needed to work around to make sure that OMB could submit their budget correctly. The finance organization could close their books, and contracts could get all their payments done. So there's certain points of the year where we couldn't get the best people involved, and so I really accommodated that to make sure that we had the right focus on this.
Plus, there's one advantage to going a little later is that now the spending module is going to have all of our lessons learned, and they actually have some additional features that we don't have in the budget module. So theirs is actually a more refined version than even what you saw today.
Sure, that's an interesting point. These stakeholders that were involved that you've been talking about, they finally got a chance to see their budget visualized. Was there any surprises once they finally took a look at their budget in this format?
Yes, in fact, this was one of our, I guess, user sessions. The big one was our capital budget, and I actually brought someone here who's sitting behind me. When I showed them this, I guess it was a couple months ago now, our capital budget is spread out over 6 years. But when we had initially designed the budget module, we were just showing to make it comparative to the operating budget 1 year. And when I brought in the rest of the staff from OMB, that was immediate red flag. So you noticed it looked like the budget module, the capital budget was much bigger, but really that figure is taking in 6 years because it really didn't make sense to show a project over 1 year, because the way the projects work, it's over a 6-year period. So that was one big thing that was screaming out initially when we designed this.
That's a good point. One other viewer question was just kind of a fun one. What is the most usable or useful feature of this application in your guys' mind?
I would say for a non-budget person like myself, there's a part of the module and an upper section where you can search across the budget. So for somebody like me who may not necessarily be an OMB and know particularly what I'm looking for, I could search for a term I was interested in, like libraries, and get results that kind of match what I need without having to really try to dig into the detail. And then once I got more familiar with the module, I could do that. But I thought that was a neat feature to have for people that who are just starting to get involved with budget information.
I also think as a county resident, that map view that I showed you is really neat. If you lived in a certain part of the county, you could actually, I zoomed in, but you could drill down to where you live and see what projects are being done in your area of Montgomery County.
Yeah, that geographic focus of those capital projects is really interesting to me, because a lot of times people like to interface with data, what data is around me is kind of their first question. So yeah, I appreciate that as well, Scott. So that is all the questions that we've gotten from the viewers. So I wanted to thank Scott and Victoria for walking us through this. Also wanted to make sure everyone knows that there's a webinar survey below the video on the page. If you have any more questions, you can email us at webinars@socrata.com, and feel free to either tweet us or email us any of those questions. So we'll also be making the video available on Socrata.com within the next 24 hours. And also keep a lookout for other webinars on these financial transparency apps, financial transparency series, if you will, in the near future, because it's an evolving space, and we want to keep you guys close to it. So with that, thank you, Scott and Victoria, very, very much. We look forward to hearing from you guys again, and everyone have a great rest of the day and into the weekend.
Thanks, Tyler.
Thank you.